The new fence was already finished when Rachel Morgan called me. Not half-built. Not leaning against a stack of lumber. Not something a contractor could still explain away as a mistake. Finished. 6-foot cedar panels ran in a clean line along the edge of her backyard in Laguna Hills. Stained a deep walnut color and capped with black metal trim. It was the kind of fence people spent money on because they expected it to stay there for decades. The problem was that it stood 6 feet and 4 inches inside Rachel's property. And behind it, on the other side of the freshly stolen strip of land, her neighbor was digging a pool. I know it sounds petty. Rachel told me when I arrived. She was standing on her patio in a faded UCLA sweatshirt, holding a folder against her chest. She was 46, a public school counselor, recently divorced, and trying very hard not to look like someone who had been crying before I got there. It doesn't sound petty, I said. It's just a fence. No, I told her. It's 6 feet of your yard, a permanente structure, and a construction project. Those are 3 separate problems. She looked past me toward the cedar panels. Her backyard was not huge. Most suburban lots in that part of Orange County were not. Rachel's home sat on a curved street called Willow Crest Lane, where every property backed toward a shallow greenbelt drainage channel. Her yard had a small lawn, 2 lemon trees, a raised herb garden, and an old concrete patio that she said her father had poured himself when she was 12. The new fence cut straight through the outer edge of that patio, not enough to make it obvious from the street. Enough to take the narrow strip where her herb garden used to sit. Enough to place one of the fence posts directly over a buried irrigation line. Enough to make the backyard feel smaller, the second you stepped into it. What did your neighbor say? I asked. Rachel let out a breath through her nose. He said his contractor followed the lot line. Did he show you a survey? No. Did he show you any map? No. Did he give you anything in writing? He texted me. Good. Show me. She handed over her phone. The message was from her neighbor, Brian Killer. Brian, hi Rachel. Just so there's no confusion, the new fence is on our property line. We verified it with our contractor. Please don't interfere with the crew. Rachel, it crosses into my garden and cuts into my patio. Brian, that patio was probably built wrong years ago. We're not reopening this. Rachel, I want to see the survey. Brian, you can pay for one if you want. But we're continuing with the pool. I handed the phone back. Did he have a survey crew here? I asked. I never saw one. Did you see anyone with equipment, tripods, markers, orange paint? No. 2 guys came with a truck, unloaded panels, and started digging holes. Then his contractor did not verify the lot line. He guessed. Rachel looked at the fence again. Can he do that? He can build a fence wherever he wants? I said. He just can't build it on land he doesn't own? That should have been simple, but it rarely is. In a perfect world, Rachel would have pulled out a recent survey, Brian would have looked at the markers, the contractor would have shifted the fence, and everyone would have gone back to pretending they liked each other at the block party. But Brian Keller was not interested in a simple answer. By the time Rachel called me, he had already told 2 neighbors that she was making trouble because she did not want anyone to improve their property. He had complained to the HOA that her lemons dropped into his yard. And according to Rachel, he had started telling people that her side patio was encroaching on him. That last part caught my attention. Did he say that directly to you? I asked. He said my patio had always been too close to the line. He said he was doing me a favor by not making an issue out of it. Has anybody ever said that before? No. My family has lived here for 22 years. Do you have the closing documents? My divorce lawyer told me to keep every document I own. I have everything. Then we start there. I walked the fence line slowly. The panels were new, but the ground underneath them told a different story. The soil was dry and pale, typical for late summer in Southern California. Along the base of the fence, I saw broken roots from Rachel's rosemary bushes, a severed drip line, and one small concrete edge where the patio had clearly continued before the contractor dug the post holes. Near the far corner, Close to the greenbelt, I found something else. A metal survey monument. Most people would have walked past it. It was almost hidden under a clump of dry grass. No wider than a bottle cap. Set into the ground near the original rear property line. The new fence did not run through it. The fence ran well in front of it. I crouched down and brushed away the dust with my fingers. "Rachel," I said, "when was the last time you saw this?" She came over and looked down. "I didn't even know it was there." "That's okay. You don't need to know it's there. Your neighbor's contractor should have." "What is it?" "Probably a survey marker. We'll confirm it before we rely on it. But that is not where somebody would put a fence if they had actually verified the boundary." Her face changed. Not relief. Not yet. Anger has stages. At first, people are shocked that someone has crossed a line. Then they wonder if they are overreacting. Then they begin to see the planning behind it. Rachel was reaching that third stage. "He knew," she said. "I don't know that yet." "Anna." He moved the fence before he started the pool. Why would he need my yard unless he knew exactly what he was doing? I looked beyond the cedar panels. Brian's backyard was a construction zone. A yellow excavator sat beside a mound of dirt. Blue spray paint marked the shape of a large freeform pool. Wooden stakes showed where a raised spa and outdoor kitchen would go. The rear corner of the planned pool came close to the fence. Too close. "Let's not guess," I said. "Let's get the records." That afternoon, we started with Rachel's title documents. Her original closing file was exactly what I expected from someone who had spent months dividing assets after a divorce. Every paper was organized in labeled folders: purchase agreement, title insurance, tax records, utility bills, home inspection report, HOA correspondence, her father's old receipts for the patio work. The title policy included a plat map from 2001. The map showed the lot boundary in clean black lines. Rachel's patio did sit close to the side and rear lines, but it did not cross them. The original wooden fence, installed by the developer, had been set roughly 10 inches inside Rachel's property, rather than exactly on the boundary. That was common in planned communities. Developers sometimes placed fences slightly inward to avoid minor construction inconsistencies or provide access for maintenance. But the important part was clear. The old fence had been inside Rachel's lot. Brian's new fence had moved outward from the original fence, crossed the true boundary, and claimed the narrow strip between the two. At the widest point, it took 6 feet and 4 inches. At the narrowest, it took nearly 4. Across the full length of the yard, it added up to 824 square feet. That was not an accidental shift. That was a decision. Rachel stared at the measurement sheet I had drawn for her. 800 square feet, she said quietly. "That's bigger than my apartment was when I was in college." "Yes. And he thinks I'm supposed to just let him keep it? He thinks you'll decide it costs too much to stop him." That was the strategy behind a lot of suburban property theft. Not stealing a whole house. Not taking something dramatic enough for the evening news. Just moving a fence, extending a driveway, widening a garden wall, or letting a contractor make a convenient little adjustment. The intruder counted on embarrassment. They counted on people saying, "It's only a few feet." They counted on the homeowner wondering whether a dispute was worth the stress. Brian had picked the wrong person to underestimate. I asked Rachel whether she had ever given him permission to move the fence. No. Did he ever tell you his pool plans would affect the boundary? No. Did he ever ask to access your yard during construction? No. Did he give you formal notice of the work? Nothing. Then we give him one chance to fix it. Rachel looked uncertain. Just one? One clear chance. I said, "That matters." The next morning, I sent Brian a certified letter, an email, and a copy by text message. I kept the language simple. The letter stated that the newly installed fence appeared to encroach on Rachel Morgan's property. It referenced the original plat map and the visible survey monument. It asked him to pause all work, affecting the shared boundary until an independent licensed survey could be completed. It gave him 7 calendar days to respond. It also made him an offer. If Brian agreed to move the fence after the survey confirmed the encroachment, Rachel would not seek repayment for the landscaping damage, the broken irrigation line, or the cost of the preliminary research. Fair. Calm. Easy to accept. He responded 41 minutes later. Brian, your letter has been received. Our contractor confirms the fence is correctly located. We will not delay a $180,000 pool project because you have suddenly decided to challenge a boundary that has existed for years. I read the text 3 times. Then I called Rachel. Do you recognize the contractor's name from any survey documents? I asked. No. Why? Because he just gave us a number. What number? $180,000. That's what he paid for his pool? That's what he says the project costs. Why does that matter? Because people do strange things when they are too close to losing a project that expensive. I was already looking at the county permit portal. Orange County had a public online database for many residential permits. You needed an address, a parcel number, or a permit reference. Brian's address gave me enough. The first result was a pool permit application filed 6 weeks earlier. The second was a grading plan. The third was a setback review. I opened the PDF and felt the shape of the story change. The pool had not been designed around the original property line. It had been designed around the new fence. The submitted site plan showed Brian's proposed pool shell ending just over 5 feet from the rear boundary. That was the minimum clearance required by the local setback rule for that type of structure. But the plan used the new fence as if it were the property line. If the actual boundary was 6 feet farther into Brian's yard, then the pool would not have 5 feet of clearance. It would have less than 1 foot. And a pool shell less than 1 foot from the property line was not a minor paperwork issue. It was a permit problem, a serious one. I printed the site plan and laid it beside Rachel's plat map. The 2 documents did not match. Brian had not moved the fence because he wanted a bigger garden. He had moved it because the pool he wanted did not fit inside his own property. I did not call the county that afternoon. Not yet. A permit problem is powerful, but it has to be presented cleanly. If you report something before you can explain it, the homeowner on the other side gets time to shape the story first. They say it is a misunderstanding. They say the neighbor is retaliating. They say the plans were preliminary. They say the contractor will correct the issue. Sometimes they are right. That is why I prefer evidence to outrage. The next call I made was to a licensed land surveyor named Hector Valdez. He had worked in Orange County for more than 20 years, and I liked him because he never tried to sound dramatic. When I explained the situation, he asked only 3 questions. Do you have the assessor parcel number? Yes. Do you have an old title plat? Yes. Is the fence still being built? It's finished. Then tell your client not to touch it. He said, I'll be there Thursday. Rachel did not like that answer. You mean I have to let it stay there? For 48 more hours. I said, it's in my yard. I know. And he's excavating for the pool right now. I know. Anna, what if they pour concrete before Thursday? Then they will be pouring concrete with a boundary problem underneath it. She looked out her kitchen window toward Brian's backyard. The excavator had started again that morning. Its engine growled behind the fence as the operator carved deeper into the dirt. Does he really not understand what he's doing? She asked. I think he understands exactly what he wants. I'm not sure he understands how much it may cost him. Thursday arrived hot and bright. Hector showed up at 7:15 a.m. in a white utility truck with a tripod, a robotic total station, and a yellow hard case full of equipment. He was in his late 50s, wore a sun-faded baseball cap, and had the patient expression of a man who had spent decades explaining lines on maps to people who preferred their own opinions. Rachel and I followed him through the backyard while he located the rear monument I had found. Then he checked a second marker near the side yard and a third marker at the front corner by the sidewalk. The work took nearly 3 hours. Brian watched from his upstairs balcony for the first 20 minutes. Then he came outside. He wore athletic shorts, a black polo shirt, and the look of someone who had spent his life getting service workers to leave problems on other people's property. "What's going on?" he asked. "Hector Valdez," Hector said without looking up. "Licensed land surveyor." "I know what a surveyor is." "Then you probably know why I'm here." Brian turned toward Rachel. "You actually hired someone?" "Yes," she said. "You're making a huge mistake." Rachel looked at him. Her voice trembled slightly, but it did not break. "No, Brian, I think you did." He came closer to the fence. "My contractor verified that line." "With what?" I asked. "A tape measure? You don't need to be involved in this." "I am involved because Rachel asked me to be." "She's perfectly capable of speaking for herself." "Then let her speak." Brian looked at Rachel again. For a moment, he seemed to realize that the version of her he had been dealing with was gone. The woman who had sent polite texts, tolerated the noise, and tried not to create friction on Willowcrest. Lane was standing beside a licensed surveyor with an open notebook and a county permit plan in her hand. "You knew I was putting in a pool?" he said. "I knew you were building something," she replied. "And you never said there was a problem?" "I didn't know you planned to take part of my yard to make it fit." His expression hardened. "You are not losing your yard. The fence is 6 feet inside it. That is not established." Hector finally looked up. "Actually," he said, "it is." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the pool excavator idling behind Brian's house. Hector walked toward the rear corner of Rachel's property and placed a bright orange stake in the ground. Then he stretched a measuring tape toward the fence. "From this recovered monument to the fence face," he said, "the distance is 6 feet, 3 7/8 inches. Brian stared at the tape. "That marker could be wrong. It is a recorded monument. It could have shifted. It is still set in concrete. My contractor checked the boundary." "Then your contractor did not check it correctly." Brian's face flushed. "You don't know what he checked?" "No," Hector said, "but I know where your fence is." He marked 2 more points with orange flags. Each one landed on Rachel's side of the fence. 10-32 m. Hector had enough data to give us a preliminary verbal finding. The fence encroached onto Rachel's property along nearly the entire rear line. The total area taken was 824 square feet. The old developer fence had sat inside Rachel's boundary, but Brian's new fence did not follow the old fence. It had been moved outward, past the boundary line, to create a larger construction area. Then Hector said the sentence I had been waiting for. "If the pool plan was drawn from this fence rather than from a field survey, the setbacks on that plan are wrong." Brian heard him. He did not argue this time. He simply went back into his house. At noon, Hector emailed his preliminary sketch. It was not the final signed survey. Those take time. But it was enough to compare with the county permit plan. The difference was almost exact. Brian's application showed a 5-foot, 2-inch setback between the proposed pool shell and the rear property line. The actual setback, if the pool was built as shown, would be 10 inches. 10 inches. A pool was not a planter box. It was not a removable patio chair. It required excavation, steel reinforcement, plumbing, drainage, electrical systems, concrete, inspection, and a long list of safety requirements. It could not legally sit 10 inches from another person's property line. That afternoon, I sent Brian the preliminary survey sketch, the title plat, and the permit comparison. I copied his pool contractor, whose name appeared on the application. The subject line was simple: urgent, property boundary and setback discrepancy. I wrote, "The attached materials show that the recently installed fence encroaches upon Rachel Morgan's property by up to 6 feet, 3 7/8 inches. The current pool site plan appears to calculate setbacks from the newly installed fence rather than from the recorded boundary line. Please suspend construction and provide written confirmation by 5 p.m. tomorrow that no additional work will occur within the disputed area. Rachel remains willing to resolve this without escalation." She requests only that the fence be removed from her property and that the pool plans be corrected before further construction proceeds. Brian replied at 4:48 p.m. Brian, we dispute your survey. The fence will remain. Construction is continuing under a valid permit. Any attempt to interfere with our project will be treated as harassment. The pool contractor replied 15 minutes later. Contractor, we relied on boundary information supplied by the property owner. We have requested clarification and will review the issue. That was important. Brian had told his contractor where the line was. The contractor had not provided a survey. The contractor had relied on Brian. I called Rachel. Do you want the good news or the bad news first? I asked. Good news. His contractor is now protecting himself. And the bad news? Brian is doubling down. She was quiet. What happens if he keeps digging? Then we show the county exactly what he was warned about. The following morning, Rachel received an email from the HOA. That did not surprise me. HOAs often enter a property dispute when somebody wants them to act like a private police department. The board did not own Rachel's yard. It could not decide the legal boundary, but Brian had clearly gone to them first. The message came from the association's architectural committee. It stated that the HOA had received a complaint regarding visible construction conflict between neighboring lots. It asked Rachel to avoid actions that might disrupt approved improvements and warned that any exterior changes, including alterations to fences, required committee approval. Rachel read the email twice. Then she looked at me. They're warning me not to move the fence that he put on my land. That's what it sounds like. Can they do that? They can regulate fence styles. They cannot give Brian the right to use your property. The architectural committee president was a man named Charles Wynn. He had lived on Willow Crest Lane for 14 years and treated the HOA handbook like it had been handed down from a mountaintop. I called him, Charles. This is Anna Reyes. I'm assisting Rachel Morgan with a boundary dispute involving Brian Keller's new fence. I'm familiar with the matter, he said. Then you know the fence may be encroaching on Rachel's land. I know there are competing claims. There is a licensed surveyor's preliminary finding. I'm not qualified to interpret surveys. Then why did your committee tell Rachel not to alter a structure located on her property? That was not the intent of the letter. Then please clarify the intent in writing. He took a breath. The association wants both parties to remain civil. So does Rachel? That's why she gave Brian a chance to move the fence before she reported anything. Brian has an approved pool project. Approved based on a plan that may show the wrong lot line? That stopped him. We were not informed of that. You are now. Charles asked me to send the documents. I did. Within an hour, the HOA's tone changed. They sent Rachel a revised email saying they would not take a position on ownership, but they reminded both homeowners that all projects had to comply with municipal permits and property laws. It was not an apology, but it was no longer a warning aimed only at Rachel. By Friday, Brian's excavation crew had started placing rebar. The pool outline was unmistakable now. A deep oval trench sat less than a yard from the new fence. Men in hard hats moved between stacks of steel and PVC pipe. One crew member was laying out plumbing lines for the spa. Brian was trying to outrun the evidence. That is another common strategy. Once concrete is poured, people feel trapped. They think the cost of undoing the mistake will make everyone else give up. They think a neighbor will look at a half-built pool, calculate the expense, and accept a smaller yard rather than become the person who stopped the project. But county inspectors do not care how expensive a mistake becomes after someone ignores a warning. At Unu, Chasse. M. I submitted a formal permit inquiry to Orange County Building and Safety. I did not call it a complaint. I attached the current permit plan, Hector's preliminary survey sketch, photographs of the fence, photographs of the excavation, Brian's text message claiming the contractor had verified the line, and the contractor's email confirming that he had relied on boundary information supplied by Brian. Then I asked one question. Can the department confirm that the required pool setbacks have been measured from the recorded parcel boundary rather than from an unverified fence location? That was it. No accusation. No exaggerated demand. Just a question the county had to answer. Monday morning, Brian found out that questions can be more expensive than arguments. At opt uns Brezece a. M. A white county inspection vehicle stopped in front of his house. At opt 16. The inspector walked into the backyard. At opt 24. The excavator shut off. At opt 31. The rebar crew started packing their tools. And at 8:37, a bright orange notice appeared on the side gate of Brian Keller's home. Stop work. The permit had not been canceled. Not yet. But every part of the pool project that depended on the disputed setback was frozen until Brian could provide a corrected site plan, a valid boundary survey, and proof that the proposed pool shell complied with the required clearance. The orange notice fluttered in the warm Santa Ana wind. Brian stood beneath it, staring at the paper. Then he looked across the fence at Rachel. And this time, there was no smug smile on his face. Only panic. Brian did not call Rachel that day. He called her at 6:42 the next morning. She let it ring twice, looked at me across her kitchen table, and answered on speaker. Hello? Rachel. It's Brian. I know. His voice was different. Not warm. Not apologetic. Just stripped of the confidence he had carried while the excavator was running. I think we need to talk like adults, he said. I've been trying to do that for 2 weeks. That county inspector is overreacting. The project isn't unsafe. The inspector didn't say it was unsafe. He said your plans may not meet the required setback. It's an administrative issue. It became an administrative issue when you built a fence on my property. A quiet breath came through the speaker. I'm willing to work something out. What do you mean? I can compensate you for the strip of land. You don't use it. Rachel looked at me. I did not say anything. She had to answer this one herself. I use my yard, she said. It's a narrow section near the back fence. It's my narrow section near the back fence. Rachel, I've already spent a lot of money. You spent it after I asked you to show me a survey. That doesn't mean we can't be reasonable now. For the first time, her voice was completely steady. Reasonable would have been asking before you moved the fence. Brian went silent. Then he said, I can offer you $25,000. Rachel blinked. The number was high enough to make most people pause. Brian knew that. He was not offering the money because 824 square feet of suburban backyard was worth exactly $25,000. He was offering it because the delay on his pool project was becoming expensive. He had paid for excavation. He had paid for engineering. He had paid for materials already delivered. He had likely paid a deposit to the contractor. And every day the permit remained frozen made the whole project less predictable. Rachel looked at the old lemon tree beside her patio. My father planted those trees, she said. He built that patio with his own hands. You cut through my irrigation line, tore up my garden, and told me I should be grateful you didn't make an issue out of it. Rachel, no. You don't get to buy my silence because your project doesn't fit in your yard. She ended the call. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Rachel leaned back in her chair and let out a breath that sounded like she had been holding it for days. I thought I would be scared to say no, she admitted. You were scared? I said. You said no anyway. That was the difference. Later that morning, the county inspector emailed both Brian and the pool contractor. His findings were concise. The existing permit had been issued based on a site plan that did not establish the parcel boundary through a recorded survey or other verified boundary documentation. Because the preliminary survey submitted by Rachel showed a material discrepancy, the permit would remain on hold. Before work could resume, Brian had to provide a corrected plan prepared from a licensed survey, demonstrate compliance with the required setbacks, and submit the revision for review. The contractor's response came quickly. He asked for a meeting. Brian did not. The contractor met us at Rachel's house at noon. His name was Sam Ortega. He was not happy, but he was not dishonest either. He had built pools for 17 years. and he knew that continuing to argue after the county issued a stop work notice would only make things worse. "I want to be clear," Sam said, standing beside the fence. "I did not know this line was disputed." "It wasn't disputed until Brian moved the fence," I said. Sam nodded slowly. "He told us the old fence was inside his lot and that he had verified the new alignment." "Did he provide a survey?" "No. He gave my foreman a sketch from a landscaping company." Rachel stared at him. "A landscaping company?" Sam looked embarrassed. "We should have required a formal survey. That's on us. But we don't set property lines. We build where the owner tells us to build." "Your crew cut my irrigation line," Rachel said. "I know. We'll make that right." That mattered. Not because it solved everything, but because Sam understood something Brian did not. When you make a mistake, you do not protect your pride by creating more damage. You fix what you can. Sam told us that the pool shell had not yet been poured. The excavation was deep, but it could still be reconfigured. The spa would need to be moved. The outdoor kitchen design would likely have to shrink. A retaining feature near the rear corner would need new engineering. "It's going to cost him," Sam said. "How much?" Rachel asked. "I don't know until the revised plans come in. But he won't like it." The next day, Brian hired his own surveyor. I expected that. People like Brian often believe a second professional will deliver the answer they paid for. But land does not care who hires the surveyor. The monuments were where they were. The recorded plat said what it said, and when Brian's surveyor finished his field work, he reached the same conclusion Hector had reached. The fence was on Rachel's property. The planned pool did not meet the rear setback. The county received the new survey 1 week later. At that point, Brian had 3 choices. He could redesign the project inside his actual property line. He could attempt to negotiate a legal purchase of a portion of Rachel's lot, or he could abandon the pool project. What he could not do was keep the fence where it stood and wait for Rachel to become tired. The county's correction notice made that impossible. Still, Brian tried one more move. He had an attorney send Rachel a letter accusing her of causing avoidable project delay by refusing a fair purchase offer. The letter suggested that she was acting in bad faith and warned that Brian might seek damages if the county ultimately approved the revised project. It was a strange letter. Not because lawyers never send aggressive letters. They do. It was strange because every fact it relied on had already been contradicted by the survey. The permit record, the photographs, and Brian's own messages. Rachel read it with shaking hands. "Is this serious?" she asked. "It is a letter," I said. "That's not what I asked. It is serious enough that you should have an attorney review it. But it doesn't change the survey. It doesn't move the property line. And it doesn't make his fence legal." She hired a local property attorney named Michelle Hahn. Michelle did not send a long response. She sent a 5-page letter with attachments. The first attachment was the recorded plat. The second was Hector's survey. The third was Brian's own text saying that Rachel could pay for a survey if she wanted one. The fourth was the county stop work notice. The final attachment was a demand. Brian had 10 days to remove the fence from Rachel's land, repair the damaged irrigation system, restore the landscaping area, and pay Rachel's survey, research, and legal costs. If he did not, Rachel would file for an injunction and seek damages for trespass and property damage. That was the first time Brian understood that the pool was no longer the most expensive thing he had built. The fence was. The HOA tried to stay out of it after that. Charles Wynn sent both homeowners a carefully worded message saying the association had no authority to determine boundary ownership. But he also informed Brian that the architectural committee could not approve revised pool plans until the county permit issue was resolved. The committee had finally recognized the obvious. An HOA could regulate paint colors, mailbox styles, and fence materials. It could not turn a private land grab into an approved neighborhood improvement. 2 weeks later, Brian came to Rachel's front door. He did not bring an attorney. He did not bring an offer letter. He came alone. Rachel called me before opening the door, so I arrived 10 minutes later and stood with her on the porch. Brian looked tired. His polo shirt was wrinkled. There were dark circles under his eyes. The clean confidence he had worn on the first day was gone. "I'm going to move the fence," he said. Rachel did not answer right away. "Okay," she said finally. "I've spoken to the contractor. We're revising the pool plans." "Okay. I want this finished without court." "So do I." He looked down at the walkway. "I didn't think it would become all this." Rachel's face did not soften. "It became all this when you decided I wouldn't fight you." That was the closest thing to an apology she ever received. But it was enough to end the dispute, not because Brian deserved an easy way out, because Rachel deserved her peace back. The fence came down the following Monday. Sam's crew arrived before 8. They removed the cedar panels one section at a time, pulled the posts from Rachel's side of the boundary, and filled the holes with compacted soil. A landscaping crew replaced the damaged drip line, rebuilt the herb garden, and repaired the edge of the patio, where the original concrete had chipped during installation. Brian paid the invoice. He also paid Rachel's survey costs, attorney fees, and the expense of restoring the yard. The settlement total came to $18. Lubai Susher. His revised pool required a smaller design, a relocated spa, and a redesigned drainage system. Sam never told us the full cost of those changes, but a neighbor later mentioned that Brian had delayed the project for nearly 4 months and spent more than $70, above his original budget. The pool was eventually completed. It was smaller than the original plan. The outdoor kitchen disappeared. The black metal fence cap Brian had chosen so carefully was never reinstalled. Instead, Rachel decided to leave the boundary open for a while. She planted low California native shrubs along her side and placed 3 large terracotta pots near the patio. She said she wanted to see the actual shape of her yard again before putting anything permanent there. A month after the settlement, I stopped by to bring her a copy of the signed agreement. The afternoon sun was low. Her lemon trees were full again. The rebuilt herb garden held basil, rosemary, and a row of small tomato plants. From Brian's yard, I could hear water moving through the finished pool filter. Rachel stood at the edge of the patio, looking toward the new shrubs. "It's funny," she said. "I used to think I didn't care about that little strip of land." "You cared once somebody took it?" "I cared before. I just didn't realize it." She looked at the orange survey stakes Hector had left behind. They had faded in the sun, but she refused to remove them. "Are you keeping those?" I asked. "For a while. They're not exactly decorative. Neither is a reminder." I smiled. She was right. People often think property rights are about being possessive. They picture someone standing in a yard with a tape measure, arguing over inches because they enjoy conflict. But that was never what Rachel's story was about. It was about whether someone with more money, more confidence, and a louder voice could take a piece of her home simply because he thought she would be too polite to stop him. Brian had called it a narrow strip of land. He had called it an administrative issue. He had called it a fair offer. But none of those labels changed the truth. It was Rachel's yard. And once the survey flags went in, every inch of it had a way of speaking for itself. If your neighbor moved a fence 6 feet into your yard and then offered money to keep it, would you take the deal or make them put every inch back where it belongs? Tell me what you would do in the comments. And subscribe to Anna's Neighborhood Justice for more HOA disputes, property line battles, and suburban conflicts where the records tell the real story